What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected, battle-tested, internationally iconic actors steps into what should have been a simple, predictable, routine morning talk show appearance, only to discover he has walked straight into the most disrespectful interrogation of his entire career? What happens when decades of professionalism, discipline, and hard-earned reputation collide head-on with open hostility, dismissiveness, and a level of condescension that no seasoned actor should ever have to tolerate on live television? To understand the full magnitude of what unfolded, you have to picture the scene as it happened. Samuel L. Jackson, a man whose presence alone can command a room, arrived at the studio expecting a typical promotional segment, light conversation, a few laughs, a couple of movie clips, and maybe a humorous anecdote or two. He'd done this 1,000 times. Talk shows were nothing new to him. He'd sat across from hosts around the world, from playful morning personalities to sharp-witted late-night comedians. No matter the atmosphere, he always knew how to handle himself. He had mastered the art of public conversation, charming audiences, cracking well-timed jokes, offering behind-the-scenes stories, and keeping things moving with that unmistakable Samuel L. Jackson charisma. But on this particular day, something felt off. The moment he entered the studio, there was a strange energy in the air, an undercurrent of tension that the audience couldn't quite place but instinctively picked up on. The co-hosts exchanged tight smiles, the producers whispered hurriedly behind the cameras, and the atmosphere felt unusually charged, as if everyone sensed they were on the brink of witnessing something they had never seen before. And they were right, because when Samuel took his seat across from Joy Behar, things shifted rapidly. What should have been a respectful conversation turned into an interrogation masquerading as journalism. Joy's tone was sharp from the start, her questions edged with sarcasm, her expressions cold, her demeanor more confrontational than curious. Instead of discussing the film he was promoting, his impressive decades-long career, or his impact on Hollywood, she plunged immediately into criticism. Not analysis, not thoughtful inquiry. Criticism. It wasn't subtle, and it wasn't clever. It was blatant disrespect. Samuel felt it instantly, the audience felt it, even the co-hosts stiffened in their chairs, sensing the escalating tension. Joy's questions weren't tough, they were combative. They weren't probing, they were pointed attacks dressed up as conversation. And every time Samuel attempted to answer with grace or redirect the discussion back to something meaningful, she cut him off with another jab. Years of self-control kept him steady at first. Samuel L. Jackson had faced harsher environments than any talk show studio. He had survived Hollywood politics, grueling film schedules, and a lifetime of navigating an industry that loved to build stars only to tear them down. But as Joy pushed harder, interrupting him, mocking his roles, questioning his relevance, the air in the studio tightened like a coiled spring on the verge of snapping. People in the audience began exchanging nervous glances. The co-hosts looked visibly uncomfortable. Even the camera operators hesitated, unsure where to point their lenses as the atmosphere spiraled from awkward to hostile. Samuel's expression didn't change much, but his silence grew heavier, sharper. Every second he didn't respond carried more weight than anything Joy had said so far. You could almost feel the moment the tension crossed from uncomfortable to dangerous, and then it happened. Samuel leaned back in his chair, removed his glasses slowly, and looked Joy directly in the eye with the kind of calm that only comes before a storm. The entire studio froze, conversation stopped, background noises faded into nothing. Even Joy seemed momentarily taken aback by the sudden shift in his demeanor. When Samuel finally spoke, his voice wasn't raised. It didn't need to be. His tone was controlled, precise, and powerful enough to command the attention of every single person watching. He didn't shout, he didn't insult, he simply spoke truth, unfiltered, undeniable truth, and the studio felt the impact like a physical shockwave. It was the kind of moment that instantly becomes television history, the kind of confrontation that people replay, analyze, and talk about for weeks. And then, in a move no one expected, Samuel L. Jackson stood up, calmly, deliberately, and walked off the set. No dramatic exit, no shouting match, no chaos, just a man refusing to tolerate disrespect. Joy Behar, who had spent her career priding herself on having a quick comeback for every situation, suddenly had nothing, not a word, Not a breath, not a sound. For the first time in years, she sat frozen, stunned, completely speechless. The co-host stared in disbelief. The audience gasped. Producers panicked off camera. The entire studio hung in a silence so heavy that it felt like the walls themselves were holding their breath. In that moment, everything changed. And today, we're diving deep into the explosive confrontation that left Samuel L. Jackson walking off the View set, silencing Joy Behar, and shocking every single person in the room. Before we dive deeper into this unbelievable story, make sure you smash that subscribe button, hit the like, and drop a comment below telling me. Samuel L. Jackson had delivered his final words with a calm, unwavering firmness that carried more weight than any raised voice ever could. I hope you learn. He had said that asking tough questions and being disrespectful aren't the same thing, and I hope you learn that the power that comes with a platform should be used to elevate people, not diminish them. Those words didn't just hang in the air, they lodged themselves into the atmosphere of the studio, settling over the room like a heavy blanket of truth. Then, without waiting for a response, Jackson stood up from his chair, adjusted his jacket with quiet dignity, and turned away from the table. The studio audience watched in stunned silence as he walked off the set of The View, each step slow, steady, and intentional. It wasn't the dramatic exit people might have expected from a Hollywood legend known for commanding every room he stepped into. It was the opposite, controlled, measured, and filled with the kind of confidence that doesn't need to shout to be heard. In that moment, Samuel L. Jackson wasn't just an actor leaving an interview. He was a man choosing integrity over chaos, composure over ego, and respect over the temptation to retaliate. Joy Behar, who only moments before had been mid-argument, now sat frozen in her seat, speechless for perhaps the first time in her long and outspoken television career. Her expression shifted between confusion, disbelief, and a dawning realization that she had crossed a line she could no longer pretend wasn't there. The other hosts glanced at one another nervously, each of them searching desperately for something to say, something that could smooth over the tension, explain what had just happened, or at the very least fill the growing silence that had taken over the studio. But nothing came. The cameras, however, did not stop. They continued rolling, capturing the raw, unfiltered aftermath in all its uncomfortable authenticity. The viewers at home and the audience in the studio had witnessed a moment that was far from the usual daytime television drama. This wasn't a shouting match or a sensational outburst designed to grab headlines. It was something infinitely more powerful, a lesson delivered not through anger, but through restraint, a moment where dignity itself became the loudest voice in the room. As Jackson's figure disappeared behind the curtain at the edge of the stage, the audience began to process what they had just seen. Conversations that had been buzzing moments earlier now faded into uneasy whispers. The silence grew, not because there was nothing to say, but because everyone understood that they had been present for something extraordinary, something that didn't need to be exaggerated or dramatized. This was not the explosive confrontation they might have expected from a celebrity known for playing fierce, commanding characters on screen. Instead, they witnessed a masterclass in emotional intelligence. Rather than allow disrespect to pull him into a pointless confrontation, Jackson demonstrated what true strength looks like. He had taken the high road, but he had taken it with precision, delivering a message so sharp and so clear that it cut through the noise more effectively than any argument could have. The audience members exchanged looks that revealed a shared understanding. They had witnessed a takedown more devastating than any raised voice or angry retort. Jackson's words, paired with his calm exit, had delivered a critique that reverberated long after he left the frame. It wasn't an insult, wasn't a rant, it was a reflection held up to the show and its hosts, forcing them to see their own behavior through the eyes of someone who refused to be belittled. Even the production staff behind the cameras seemed momentarily frozen, unsure of whether to cut to commercial, redirect the conversation, or attempt to salvage the interview that had dissolved so swiftly and unexpectedly. The remaining hosts shuffled papers, offered awkward smiles, and attempted to regain control of the broadcast, but the moment had already consumed the room. No amount of scripted transitions or rehearsed professionalism could disguise the weight of what had just happened. Joy Behar finally attempted to speak, but her voice trailed off before forming a full sentence. The discomfort on her face spoke louder than her words could have. For once, the woman known for her sharp commentary and fiery debates had nothing to say. And perhaps that silence, unexpected, rare, and deeply telling, was the most significant reaction of all. The studio lights continued to shine brightly, but the atmosphere had shifted entirely. The energy that had filled the room at the start of the interview now felt distant, replaced by a collective awareness that something had gone very wrong. Yet at the center of that discomfort was also a profound sense of respect for a man who had refused to compromise his values, even when provoked on one of the most widely watched talk shows in America. What the audience had witnessed was not just a viral moment or a dramatic television incident. It was an example of how power can be wielded with grace rather than aggression. Samuel L. Jackson had shown that you don't need to raise your voice to make a point. You don't need to insult someone to expose their flaws. Sometimes the most devastating response is a calm truth, delivered with unwavering confidence, followed by a quiet exit that leaves the other person confronting their own reflection. And so, as the silence stretched on after Jackson's departure, it spoke louder than any argument, louder than any comeback, louder than any attempt to spin the moment into entertainment. It was the silence of recognition that a boundary had been crossed, a lesson had been delivered, and a man had chosen to walk away rather than participate in something beneath him. In that silence, everyone understood that they had just witnessed one of the most remarkable moments in live television history, a moment where dignity was the victor, disrespect was exposed, and Samuel L. Jackson walked away not in anger, but in unmatched, unforgettable grace.